Hello and welcome to SketchQuest. We here at TYG have collected some of the most talented artists within our reach to create this series as we work towards improving our artistic skills. Come join us and begin your journey today. Your legend starts here. But before we can paint for the gods, it's time to start with some basics. And don't worry if you're only just starting out, because I'll be learning alongside you. And remember, if you want to share your creations with us, use the hashtag SketchQuest. Let's see what today's quest is, shall we? Welcome back, adventurers. It's Friday and we have one more quest for this week, and then it is on to the weekend for some fun. You won't believe what we've got in store for you. We've got J.L.P. back with us today. How are you doing, Precious?
I'm good, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. What's the quest that we've got today?
Today I'm going to be teaching you a few different shading types.
Ooh.
Yeah. When doing digital art, there typically is about 4 different shading types that are very noticeable. There are a few more, but these are the ones that I see most commonly. So the first one is gradients using the gradient tool. However, I think these ones tend to look just a little bit flat. They can be really helpful when you're first starting out drawing, but as we can see, it doesn't add any like depth or shape to the circle here. So gradients tend to add color in like a very flat kind of square kind of way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, the better for like horizons and sunsets.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I first used gradients when I was starting out, so I think they're quite beginner friendly.
Yeah.
But they just don't add any form to shapes typically. The next is cell shading. So this is when we add shading to an object, but there is a lack of blending. People have different definitions of cell shading. However, I would just class it as a piece that doesn't have any blending to it. So you can see here that we've got the 3 different shades or values, and they haven't been blended on the piece. So there's also rough blended shading that we can use, and it is done with a low opacity and with pen sensitivity, and it's done to create this like blended effect. And the last one is what we would call soft shading, and it typically uses the airbrush to create this like shadowy, very blended effect on the object.
So what would you typically say each of these would be like used for? Because we said gradients can be used for backgrounds and things like that.
So I would use gradients for a background typically, or a flat surface. Cell shading is better if you're using an art style that wants to like really stand out and pop with the shadows and colors. You typically see these with like very cartoony styles. Rough blending tends to be used for rendered pieces and like detailed illustrations. You can see with the illustration on Mashi's side that I used a rough blending to blend all the shapes and colors together. And then a soft airbrush is usually an art style choice, but it can be used for very like hyper realistic pieces or pieces that need a very smooth edge to them or a smooth texture.
Okay. So we've got cell shading, which is like cartoony. The rough blend, which is like mid-realism, and soft airbrush, which is like ultra-realism.
Yeah. That's the way I would use them.
See? We're learning.
A way that we can create very soft blurred shading in Photoshop is by going to Filters, Blur, and using the Gaussian blur. You can see here that before there's no blur added, and after this is with the blur. This can help when you really want to be able to add smooth shading to like an object, for example like in the airbrush effect that we were showing before. So this would be an example of using the rough shading that we showed earlier. I typically call this rendering, and I use something called the color picker method, which is when we put two colors together, and then we try and color pick between them, and using a low opacity with the brush, we're able to kind of blend the colors together. A way that we can do this is creating a shape and adding a lighter color to it that we want to blend together. And you can do this one with a simple hard round brush. And then by just lowering the opacity of the brush, we can slowly create this kind of blend between the two colors. And we can blend it more by color picking the color and then continuing to blend between them. And that can create this kind of rendered sort of effect with the shading. It can take a little time and a lot of practice, but I see a lot of artists using this, and it kind of blends the colors in nicely while still giving it a very like painterly brush feel. Like that. You can see we blended two shades together using the color picker.
Magic.
Yeah. But this is why the opacity can be quite helpful actually. Cell shading can also be done with two colors. We can do this with a brush with full opacity this time. And you can see here that we've been able to create two shades on the piece like that. So that's how I would do cell shading. So I personally like to create my cell shaded pieces with a mixture of the cell shading technique and the airbrush technique. So you can see here that we use cell shading to fill in large areas of the piece. And I like to use an airbrush effect to add some softness to the piece, like on here and here. So I'm personally a fan of using both of these techniques in my work.
Mixing it up depending on what you want.
Yeah, you can do a mixture of like any kind of shading really. You can add rendering in here, or you can add the hard cell shading or the airbrush shading. And you can see here, like in the background, I've actually used the gradient here. So I've kind of used a mix of quite a few different techniques in this piece.
So many details.
So my quest for you today would be to get a rectangle and practice both the cell shading technique and the rendering technique, or the rough shading technique, as some people prefer to call it, and seeing which ones you prefer and experimenting with both of them in your own artwork.
We look forward to seeing what you all come up with. And remember to use the hashtag SketchQuest if you want to share your work with us. We are going to be looking forward to seeing what everyone's done this week and seeing everything getting put into practice this weekend as we delve into some fun little games. Are you excited?
I'm very excited.
It's going to be fun. Thank you very much for joining us again, JLP.
Thank you so much for having me.
Remember to check J.L.Phillips out on the interwebs all over the place, and we'll drop some links down in the descriptions below. Until then, stay safe everyone. We'll see you later, taters. Bye!
Bye!